Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this first session of our Sustainable Procurement event, which EDAS is delighted to be hosting as part of its Community of Practice series, supported by the Scottish Government. My name is Liz McEntee, and I'm Chair of EDAS and delighted to be hosting today's event, which will offer an opportunity to consider the sustainable procurement duty, hopefully dispelling some of the myths and misunderstandings about its scope and limitations along the way. Now, I should say from the outset that we had intended to run this event some time ago at a venue and in person. But as you'll all know, world events intervened. So as with all EDAS events since March, we've moved online, thankfully with relative ease so far, so we'll keep our fingers crossed that it's the same today. It's great to see a good turnout this morning and also to have such a wide range of participants from different backgrounds and sectors. I realise the opportunity to mingle is lessened when we're doing these Zoom online events, but I hope you will still be able to make connections during the roundtable workshops that will take place after our speaker input. Now, there has, of course, been a great deal of interest in the subject of procurement in recent years, as we look to address ways to ensure that public sector investment in both infrastructure and key services adds positive benefits to people, communities, and our environment. And it's a subject that will be even more important now as we look to recover and rebuild our economy and address inequality that COVID is unleashing in the months and years to come. So this event is, to say the least, a timely one. Now, we have a packed agenda this morning and really excellent speaker input, and I'm delighted to say, I think possibly for the first time, I've chaired many events over the years in my other role with GCVS, but I have to say, I think it's the first time that I have ever had an all-women panel, so well done for that. But firstly, we'll have an overview from Jo Mitchell, who heads up procurement policy in the Scottish Government, to set the scene. Jo will be joined by Lorna Rennick from Public Health Scotland to share what good procurement looks like. We'll then have a series of good practice examples from Edwina Ryan, procurement policy specialist in the Scottish Government, reflections on what the duty means for jobs and training by Laura Brady from the CITB in Scotland, and finally perspectives on ways procurement can support communities by Vanessa Robertson from Perth and Kinross Council. And then finally we'll move into roundtable workshops, and you'll all have been assigned a group to join, details of which will appear on the screen when we get to this part of the morning. Now, because of time constraints and also the practicalities of managing a large meeting like this, can I ask that you add any questions and comments or points of clarification you have to the chat box so that they can be shared with speakers throughout the event. And time permitting, we may be able to come back to some of the questions at the end of the session, following feedback from the workshops. We've also taken the liberty of keeping our audience muted today, not because we don't want to hear what you've got to say, but simply to make sure that we run this meeting in a smooth manner. So hopefully all that's very clear and understood and straightforward for everyone. And without further delay, I'd like to just give a brief introduction to Jo Mitchell from the Scottish Government, who's our first speaker today. Previously a private sector buyer before joining Scottish Government, Jo has a really well-rounded insight into procurement. She's ideally placed to be sharing an overview on sustainable procurement duty, given in particular her involvement on increasing social and economic impact, the sustainable procurement policy, the development of the Procurement Reform Scotland Act in 2014, and promoting a consistent approach to sustainable public procurement in Scotland. Since the announcement of the climate emergency, this has resulted in an increased emphasis on positive environmental outcomes, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about that today. So welcome, Jo, and over to you for your presentation.
Morning. Thanks, Liz. Thanks to everybody for turning up, and I'd like to thank our colleagues in Economic Development at Scottish Government for supporting this event. As Liz said, my name is Jo Mitchell, and I think I can't see who's here, but I expect I know quite a lot of people in the audience because I've been in this business for a while. I think for me, if we just move on to the next slide, thanks, Alison. Procurement is subject to hopes and expectations by the public, by politicians, by businesses, and I suppose what I want to do today is to assure people in the audience that buyers know this and that we're used to achieving a wide range of benefits. I think that today I want to treat this as an opportunity to show you that's what we do, and we share similar hopes, and I particularly, I would say, share similar hopes, and that to a degree we welcome, although that's a bit of an optimistic word, but yeah, we do welcome the challenge. We do like to try to do things differently and do things well. I think the emphasis for me as well today is about we can do this by working together. I mean, in procurement, it's largely about how you buy things rather than what you buy. And we've got long experience in Scotland, and I suppose this came through when community wealth building first appeared on the Scottish horizon. That it came across to me that a lot of people didn't seem to be aware of just how much buyers across the public sector in Scotland were aware of what was expected of them and how much they'd already achieved. We have a long history of working with colleagues in employability in Scottish Government and in local authorities to achieve jobs and training. And I'm obviously going to particularly mention Laura Brady from CITB, because CITB have been working with Scottish Government, I think, for nearly 10 years on this, supporting us in our efforts. We've more recently been working, we've always worked with health procurement, but it's great to now be working more with public health, and Lorna and I'll be chatting later. And also, of course, economic development. And I think the key for us today is to actually make sure we've got that reach into economic development, to understand that this is about early engagement to identify and exploit supply and demand. And by demand, I don't just mean jobs and services. I don't just mean what we're buying. I mean jobs, I mean opportunities for SMEs in the third sector. I mean ways in which we can use procurement to use our contracts and frameworks to address inequality and to promote equality. We do this already. This slide gives a brief summary from our first Minister's report, and there's another one that we're hoping to get out by the end of the year. COVID, I have to admit, has held up some of the research and work that we've been able to do in preparing that. But yes, so these estimates still hold quite good. You know, this is not new to us. We're really keenly aware that procurement is supposed to be about economic activity and contribute to sustainable economic growth for Scotland. Our economists produce these figures, and as I say, they're in our first annual report. And we're really comfortable with trying to make contracts accessible, whether that's directly or through the supply chain, to SMEs in the third sector. And while we're not legally able to, we're also really comfortable with driving real living wage. So these figures just give some idea of what we've been doing in that space. Could I get the next slide, please, Alison? So as I said, procurement's about how and not what we buy. We spend over 11 billion a year buying goods, works and services. But in our own right, we don't have a budget for these. We're not spending our own money, we're spending other people, of course, taxpayers' money. And procurement is largely about the controls and mechanisms about putting those contracts into place, about assuring equal treatment, transparency in the process. So that's really, I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding. I quite often hear people saying, well, why don't you allocate a percentage of your procurement budget to this? And I think it's just really important to understand that if you give us this time, we can really be smart about what we buy. We can buy, construction. Well, we regularly buy construction, which also provides job opportunities, training opportunities for priority groups. And that's particularly important at the moment when we're looking at coming out of the pandemic, or making our way through the pandemic and economic recovery. If you could just move to the next slide, please, Alison. I think I suppose a lot of you will be familiar with the sustainable procurement duty, but we always use this slide, and I think why I'm pushing it today is because this is the way through for buyers in the public sector in Scotland. Every time they're spending more than £50,000, they've got to think about how they can improve social, economic and environmental well-being, how they can involve small businesses of their sector and supported businesses, and how they can promote innovation. This is the bread and butter of the job. And further on, I'll explain the reporting cycle. So the two parts to the sustainable procurement, think about how you can do this and act in a way to achieve it. So could you move on to, not the next slide, but the one after that, please, Alison? Thank you. So I think how I would like to equate this is, for procurement, our core policy is the sustainable procurement duty. That is the lens through which we drive everything to achieve the wider outcomes. And what we've done is we've aligned it with the national performance framework. So we're trying to get a consistency of language so that this is a universal traction across Scotland with the buying community. And also what we've done by matching this to the national performance framework, we find that we've got a line of sight that fits quite easily into all the new or emerging policies. So inclusive growth doesn't scare us. Fairer Scotland, we welcome, because that fits right in with improving social environmental well-being and reducing inequality. Community wealth building, well, as I say, that's kind of what we do. And increasingly, as Liz mentioned at the start, the drive for addressing the climate emergency and what we can do through procurement. So I think there's sometimes a mismatch, and I suppose that's one of my key points today, is that the language across policy areas and across regions will vary, but by having this national procurement legislation with a clear narrative and with the statutory guidance that underpins it aligned to the national performance framework, we're hoping that we can get some coherence that will enable us all to work together, to understand each other better, and to achieve the best outcomes as we go through. Can we get the next slide, please? So specifically, I thought this is a bit of a list, and I apologise for the list. But for anybody who's not familiar, this is the range of things that we regularly consider in our procurements. And what we've done is we've trained hundreds of buyers across Scotland. We've involved other non-procurement people in training in the past. And we've provided a sort of two-tier way of addressing this, both at a resource level for an organisation to consider how they can prioritise and allocate resources to the procurements that are upcoming, the procurements they have in place, to make sure they're getting the best outcomes out of those across the spectrum. So not going after everything all the time, but actually prioritising and going after the right outcomes in the right contracts. As I say, this very much came, funnily enough, from an environmental view. With our national performance framework, particularly the previous iteration, there's been a very much socioeconomic focus in Scotland, but we'll be moving, as I say, we'll be balancing that out increasingly with climate emergency. Can we get the next slide, please, Alison? So I think the other thing is, I mentioned that the sustainable procurement duty asks people organisations to consider and act on opportunities to achieve all those benefits that I mentioned earlier, and access to smaller businesses, etc. And I think what really makes us different to other parts of the UK in particular is that there's a robustness to this, and still quite, I mean, the Act is 2014. The reporting really only kicked in about 2017. So it's still relatively immature. But every public body that spends over 5 million out of procurement in a year there's a governance around that in terms of our legislation. People are asked to set out in a strategy how their procurement activity will contribute to their own outcomes and to the national performance framework. And the idea again behind that is to allow local flexibility, but with a strategic line of sight. Then this was set out, and the sort of through the strategy, they sort of identify what the priority is going to be for the coming year, and to work through that in their contracts, and then to annually report on what they're achieving through their procurement activity. I haven't put links, but we can get them to you if you need them. I think hundreds, we get over 100 public bodies doing this. The reports are available from a single link on our website, and they are then sort of followed up by a minister's report, which is also a legal requirement. So the figures that I provided at the start of the presentation were from our first minister's report, and our second one is imminent, as we just couldn't get hold of our economists. They had other things to do recently. So that we're expecting that to be out by the end of the year, and that will show you just how this work continues. And the other thing is to sort of draw out the things we need to do better and how we can make progress. So the other thing we have hopefully coming out next month is some research on the impact of the sustainable procurement and duty and the difference that it's making. So really that's all I wanted to sort of outline today. I think the far more interesting bit is what Edwina and Laura and Vanessa will be presenting, because they're presenting how this is all done in practice, the good work that's been done across Scotland, and say hopefully to give you confidence that, you know, procurement people across Scotland understand that procurement is expected to deliver wider social and economic benefits, that this happens routinely, that there is ambitions, there is a degree of confidence, but it's very much about speaking to us early and to, so that we can identify what's the best thing to do in each instance. Right, that's really me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jo. That was a really good introduction and a good overview in terms of setting the scene and really reminding us of the framework that's in place already and the legislation that's in place to support procurement and the benefits that can come from procurement. I'd now like to introduce Lorna Rennick, who will join Jo in offering some perspectives on what good procurement looks like. Lorna is a public health professional specialising in health improvement and in inequalities. She's worked locally, nationally and internationally as organisational lead with the NHS, Leadership, Place and Wellbeing at Public Health Scotland, and she advises and supports the Scottish Government. Key to today, Lorna is involved in the development of Public Health Scotland's programme to support community wealth building, including addressing inequalities through procurement and anchor institution development. And I'm sure many of you in the room will have a link to those issues. So over to you, Lorna.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be invited along today, and I can't, obviously, as Liz said, you can't see the participants. I've had a look on the list and it's really great to see such a wide and varied group of people. I may well do this in a kind of joint conversation with yourself, Jo. I'm not sure if that's possible. And I did have a couple of slides. I wondered if we could just share the first slide, not the title slide, but just the next one. Yeah, that'd be great. So I know that this has been lined up as what good looks like, and I'm very aware that coming from public health and health improvement, this is not, procurement is by no manner of means my area of expertise. So what I wanted to do was, I suppose, go back to some of our basics, and you may well be, as a group, some of you will be more or less aware of what's happening around the public health agenda generally in Scotland just now. So I just wanted to make the links with what Jo's just said there around the sustainable procurement duty, and then talk a wee bit about some of the work that we're starting to tee up in Public Health Scotland, but also where we could make links locally, because I think the what good looks like will come in the next sessions. But what I wanted to get across was, I suppose, where we could add some value, and also where we would want to see the big gains around and the big outcomes that procurement can support for public health priorities. So I've got up there, you may well be very aware of the Scotland's public health priorities. These were developed in the last couple of years through a process of public health reform, and these are for the whole of Scotland, the whole of the system. They're not just for Public Health Scotland. They were decided across a range of stakeholders and partners and community input. But I've highlighted one there, which is number 5, and it's a developing and going forward post-COVID will be one area that Public Health Scotland will be looking to support the broader system quite significantly, and that's a Scotland where we've got a sustainable, inclusive economy with equality of outcomes for all. So the read across, obviously, Jo's talked about environmental and social impact, and I'm not going to reiterate what she said there, but the key things that you will all be very aware of for us in public health, and the things that perk our ears up, are the access for small businesses in terms of public contracts, fair work, community benefit, equality duties, and of course climate emergency. So they're all really significant areas that contribute to that public health outcome, and it isn't just number 5. They significantly contribute to mental health. Obviously, for early years, a lot of these. So access to contracts, fair work, community benefits could significantly contribute to child poverty, for example, and that hits off our outcome for flourishing in early years. And also, if there's a flourishing local economy, we then have a place where people can live in vibrant, healthy and safe places and communities. So there's a really strong read across, and it may be stating the obvious, but I think we've only in the last couple of years made that good link with procurement at national level and with economic development also. And I know locally some people have made really good inroads with their public health teams in economic development and procurement leads in councils and health boards, but that link's not it's not there everywhere, so it's not in all areas. So that would be one thing that I would really want to encourage from today. I wonder if we'll have a quick look at the next slide, and then I'll invite Jo to maybe just comment. So just to articulate a wee bit more about that sustainable inclusive economy outcome. So Public Health Scotland, you may be aware also, has undergone really significant change. We were vested as a new body on the 1st of April, right in the middle of the emerging pandemic. And it has been really challenging to, we have just launched our strategy last month, and it is a very different looking strategy that we would have hoped to have been developing and working on if things had been different, but we are where we are. So I've been working on in the last couple of years at national level on procurement and community benefits with NHS Scotland, and that has been quite interesting because there's obviously all the legislative narrative around the sustainable procurement duty, and now post-COVID, actually there's probably a lot more focus on local investment and reshoring manufacturing. There's a lot more discussion about inclusive economy and inequalities, which is good to see, I think, because COVID's shone a light on some of the issues around economic inequality. So that's all good, but the practicality of it is still quite challenging. So we've been developing a portal, and we'll hear a wee bit about a local one as well, but it's just trying to link national contracts to local community benefit. There's a bit of a challenge there, but NSS and National Procurement, NHS, are looking at that. Public Health Scotland at the moment are also looking at an evidence review on inclusive economy. And we're basically trying to work up our programme around community wealth building, procurement being a really significant part of that. And as Jo said, we've got a lot of well-trodden, really good practice and experience in Scotland for that. So we're not looking to be reinventing the wheel. What we've been looking to do is trying to tie in public health practitioners and specialists to at local level to potentially help support some of the evidence and assessing impact of the economic development work locally and procurement work. And the other thing I just wanted to flag in terms of what good looks like, I think one of the things that at a national level, what we'd be quite keen to do with Scottish Government as well is look at how wellbeing economy and indicators for wellbeing are put at the heart and centre of economic development. So, and that speaks to what that Public Health Priority 5 is around sustainable inclusive economy. And of course, I'm delighted to say we've just Public Health Scotland as a new body has just submitted our application for accreditation for living wage employer, as have National Services Scotland as well. So we're really we did have that previously as Health Scotland, but we're a much bigger body now. So the implications obviously for that for procurement are significant. So I'm really pleased about that. So I'm not going to say any more. Joe, I don't know if you want to come in and just reflect, I suppose, just some of the national developments and where you think Public Health Scotland could focus. That would be good to get insight at local level as well, if people have made links with public health and their NHS board procurement leads as well, because that's where I think the sweet spots are in terms of collaboration, which you mentioned as well, Joe.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and I feel like I'm stealing other people's shows here, but when Vanessa was presenting at the conference on Tuesday, one of the things she said is keep it simple. And I think one of the things that makes all the difference for everybody, and I suppose that's why I laboured the point a bit in my own presentation, is this thing of what we've tried to do is just have a single sustainable procurement framework, set of language that links back to the National Performance Framework. In Scottish Government, we work with National Performance Framework colleagues to try and make sure those links are accurate and correct, and we're quite keen to be involved in any development around those. I would say that, I mean, I'm very fortunate because I've been doing this a long time, but I would say there's been a developing narrative that helps people understand, and I think Edwina will cover that to a degree, but part of the developing narrative is that just, sort of is an understanding of things that will make a difference to people's life chances and life choices. So one of my favourite pieces of work that we ever did was through what was TERU, was the impact of community benefits, and it was sort of saying focus on priority groups, get recognised qualifications, this thing that actually having a job, having a decent standard of living. So I think there's sometimes when we get new words in procurement or new phrases or new policy colleagues coming and asking us to do something, it's not always immediately apparent as to how that might take effect. So I'd say in the narrative for me, in terms of procurement and public health, it's come from actually jobs and training, and then moving into jobs and training for priority groups. The fact that actually, worthwhile employment is a huge help for people's mental health. And I say also the stuff that Vanessa's talking about, which is about, just doing things at a grassroots community level. The other, and I think really the support of other policy areas, because again, procurement people aren't the experts. We know of it. As I say, I'm in a fortunate position. I work closely with colleagues from all sorts of policy areas, but just to help them understand that this is the bread and butter of what they do, that actually by somebody having a job or somebody getting some training or somebody getting some work experience, and just by not going for the usual suspects, that you're actually improving, an opportunity to improve physical, mental well-being. And then just people will focus in more and more on the right interventions and ask more and more for the right interventions in the procurement activity.
Yes, we've had this discussion at national level with NSS around this portal that they're developing, which is essentially, someone described it from one of the boards, one of the procurement leads said, this is just a dating service. So it's just linking up those national contracts where the companies are not based in Scotland, they're generally international, say a big international pharmaceutical company that don't have a base in Scotland. So they're not vested in a community, and then it's linking them up with local community benefit but asks that are based on local priorities. And we've had a lot of discussion about the keeping it simple, but also actually we really need to focus in on things that will support exactly what you said, the employability and also child poverty, because in COVID times, they're the things that are really hitting hard. So that keeping it simple and thinking about things that are sustaining rather than quick wins are also what we would like, what I would say would be what good looks like. So something that is sustaining and not, and when you get a big list, the temptation, I think, is to pick off the things that are potentially easier and a better photo opportunity. And that's fine, but actually things that are more sustaining and will have longer term impacts and are maybe not as sexy and glamorous in terms of a case study and a write-up and an award, but the things that actually are really going to have meaningful change for people are the things that I would be relating to the public health outcomes that are more sustaining.
And I think, as I say, because this came through jobs and training, it originally started in construction, it started in jobs and training, and I think it's a maturing or an evolving picture, and I think it's, you know, some different organisations are at different stages on that journey. I mean, obviously, Glasgow, they did a great job with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, but part of that was a really forward-thinking contractor. The PMO was from Govan, and this is my chance.
Yeah.
You know, he thought, I'm going to. So there were a multiplicity of benefits through that procurement. We enabled it, the way the procurement was put in place enabled that to happen. But you had a contractor who wanted to improve the life chances of the people in the surrounding area.
And that hospital example as well, I suppose, is where the anchor institution works. So a lot of the public health leads in boards are at the moment looking at how the NHS and the procurement function of the NHS, alongside other things like, for example, how they repurpose their vacant and derelict land. And I've not got a cat walking across my desk at the moment, but the window cleaner has just appeared at the window, which is very disconcerting. Sorry about that. You won't be able to see it, but it's very distracting. So the NHS, so that procurement aspect of it, the public health leads are really actively putting papers to their boards and asking for resource to really look at this and making stronger links with their procurement leads. But I think actually they need to also make links with economic development and procurement leads in the councils as well, so that there's just a stronger foundation. And that will be there in some areas, but not in others. So I think that's something we need to support, that collaboration, and events like this help with that.
I mean, the other thing I'd probably bring up is actually I had a sort of a Damascus moment in the early days of this. So shortly after we produced the first community benefits report, I was working with some third sector, and you know, it became apparent how important these requirements were to help with, you know, to sort of encourage their sector to bid, and you know, so they've been huge champions of this work. But I think you kind of keep moving from this sort of very on the ground to quite, I find it sort of go up and down. So one minute you're right on the ground and it's just gritty in an individual benefit. We have I'll go back to the case study in a minute, but then you're sort of going back up to, I say, what am I trying to achieve? It's what am I trying to achieve? I'm trying to achieve, you know, better outcomes for citizens of Scotland. We have on our website a case study of a tiny community benefit. In essence, it's a tiny community benefit, but it was one of our contractors. I can't remember the value of the contract, and it was a single internship for a disabled person. And actually, what we feel that did with that company was it changed them from thinking, oh yes, I'm giving a job opportunity to a disabled person, I'm ticking that box, to actually it just opened their minds. When they saw the candidates coming through, they suddenly realised they'd been missing a trick with, you know, a whole market of talented people. So I think, you know, I'm really attached to that. It's quite a recent case study, probably the last year or so, but you know, it's just that thing, you can do something that doesn't seem like a big deal. I mean, people say, oh, that's a lot of money, and they didn't do very much. It was one person. And it's a bit like your sort of high-vis jackets example, Lorna. It's sometimes these things actually just help change the way a person thinks or a company behaves.
I'm sorry to have to stop the flow of what's a really interesting dialogue between the two of you right now, but I'm conscious of the time, and I'm conscious of contributions. But it's really interesting listening to and reflecting on, you know, the experiences that you've had, and also kind of, I suppose, reflecting on it from my own perspective as well, because I come mostly from a third sector background, although I had 5 years in economic development in Glasgow, and just thinking of that journey and community benefits, which was around 15, 20 years ago, and where it's developed from. And for me, I think what's been really good, what you said so far, is that it's quite clear the framework's there, the legal framework's there, the ideas, the vision, the policy, it's all in place. But translating that and making it happen is the real challenge. And also, I think, given the times that we're living in, and what's likely to happen, goodness knows, with our economy, we can see it already, post-COVID, if we ever get to a post-COVID point. But nonetheless, the kind of impact on inequalities, parts of the country weren't in great shape anyway before COVID. Now, frankly, we don't know what we're going into, but we can anticipate it. It's going to take almost all hands on deck. It's going to take all the players, all the people who can address a whole range of issues around equalities and fairness and so on, to really kind of get our economy back on track. So I think, the point you were making about kind of opening up and not working in our little silos, economic development over here, health over here, and third sector somewhere over here, we have to come together. And I think the framework's in place to do that, but it's just how we make that happen. So on that kind of note, I'd now like to invite Edwina Ryan, who's our next speaker, who's going to focus on the opportunities and flexibilities offered by the Sustainable Procurement Duty. And just a little bit about Edwina. As Scottish Procurement Policy Officer, Edwina's particular focus is around community benefits and social impact. And today she's aiming to highlight the opportunities and flexibilities of the Sustainable Procurement Duty. So can I welcome Edwina to take the floor?
Okay, it's me unmuted, I hope. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, everyone who has come today. I'm very conscious of time. What I will do is I'll run through this quite quickly and leave Laura and Vanessa to really highlight their fantastic practice. So first of all, the purpose, part of the purpose of why I'm here today, but also the purpose of the day in general, is really to help with the Sustainable Procurement Duty in the context of socio-economic development, and also help you better understand how the Sustainable Procurement Duty, as Joe's already touched on, can really help to achieve inclusive growth. Move on to the next slide. Okay, so first of all, very, very briefly, effectively, when you're procuring, what you have to do. What I'm going to do very briefly is break down the Sustainable Procurement Duty into what I have to do, which isn't all that much, what I can't do, and largely I'm going to speak about all of the opportunities that are within it. So what you have to do, it's a requirement in public procurement to compete contracting opportunities, treat supplier equally, etc., etc. What we really can't do in Scotland is we can't mandate living wage, we can't mandate local, but it doesn't mean that we can't achieve these things. There are drivers. In Scotland, we do, in public procurement in Scotland, we have an excellent record of real living wage, for example. So there are ways and flexibilities within the law and the legislation that still allow you to do these things. So the Sustainable Procurement Duty is our central policy. It's through the duty that we aim to drive inclusive growth, particularly place-based inclusive growth. I'd really like to get across that the Sustainable Procurement Duty can really offer a bit of inspiration and can be a vehicle through which to focus your local efforts in socio-economic development and achieving your local priorities. It's really here, as I said, to inspire rather than be an unnecessary barrier. I'll just quickly skip this slide actually to make way for time. So as we've been discussing already this morning, the National Performance Framework is here in front of you. As Joe outlined, the sustainable procurement duty is underpinned by the National Performance Framework. As we've also briefly touched on, it was relaunched in 2018 and is underpinned in our legislation. So at a local level, if you're working with the sustainable procurement duty, you're helping to reach your outcomes and indicators of the National Performance Framework, which in turn finish a line of sight to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So in Scotland, there is a full line of sight to what you're achieving locally, to Scotland as a nation, to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There is that full line of sight in what we're hoping to achieve here. So local priorities. What we do on a national level and what you guys have an opportunity to do at a local level, it's you and your communities that know best what your community needs, what your community wants, and it's so important, and Vanessa will speak on this more, community engagement at the beginning of the process. It's integral to helping achieve local community benefit. At a national level, if we were to, sort of provide a list and say, tick this off, it's not necessarily going to achieve what your community wants or what's really appropriate. So early engagement in the procurement process, in the contracting, is really important and can really make or break a project achieving fantastic community benefits. I think also what I will highlight is subcontracting opportunities in larger contracts should be considered as community benefits. So, while a large contract might be being led by perhaps a larger organisation, those subcontracting opportunities shouldn't be forgotten or not included as community benefits, because local employment, as Joe has already touched on, is really the cornerstone to reducing inequalities and really helping local areas achieve inclusive growth. I've got a few very brief examples here of good practice, more at a national level. Our Warmer Homes contract is a national contract. However, it has achieved a lot of local priorities. For example, as far away as Shetland, this contract has helped to achieve employment locally, has helped to achieve outcomes in the local community. So while it's a massive national contract, it's not something that's based in Edinburgh. It is across the country and is achieving local priorities. And as I've already briefly touched on, subcontracting opportunities through that large contract have been beneficial far and wide. I'm aware that time is coming very, very quickly. So what I will do actually is, rather than going through these, I will pass on to Laura, who can give good practice examples.
Thank you for that, Edwina. Let me just share my screen with you guys. I'm presuming everybody can see that. Good morning, everyone. My name's Laura Brady. I'm one of the local managers for CITB Scotland, and I sit within the Strategic Partnerships team. I'm delighted to be here with you all, albeit virtually, and have noted on the list that there's some familiar faces in the room. I don't suspect what I'm going to talk about is anything new. I'll be covering off our involvement in supporting industry to deliver community benefit skills, training and jobs over the last 10 years here in Scotland. So I thought it useful just initially to give you a little bit of an overview about CITB, who we are and what we do. We're the Industry Training Board for Construction and a partner in the Sector Skills Council. We have legislation in place to impose a levy on the construction industry and redistribute that levy in terms of grants and funding to support the industry to deliver skills, training and recruitment. Every 3 years, we have to go out to industry for a period of intense engagement and consultation to identify what the priorities are for industry over the next 3 years. And once we have agreement and consensus on that, that levy order is agreed and passed by Parliament. So CITB have just released their strategic business plan for 2020 through to 2025, and the priorities remain largely the same as they have done over the last 10 years, just with more streamlined and redefined projects that sit underneath those priorities to deliver those aims and objectives. First of all, careers, attracting new talent into the industry and providing clear information, advice and guidance on routes into the sector, working in partnership with Skills Development Scotland to get the information on our online Go Construct platform. And also providing opportunities for people to obtain real on-site experience and help them to determine whether or not construction is for them. We are looking to expand on the existing hub model, which has been running in England in the last 2 years. That's a fund we're managing, the Construction Skills Fund, again to provide on-site work experience opportunities. And of course, we will look to improve and deliver that better up here in Scotland. It is a funded project and it enables clients, local organisations and industry to come together as a collaboration and put forward a proposal and a project in terms of how they can support local people to come onto site, get that experience, get some training and then move into those sustainable employment opportunities. Watch this space. That fund will be launched within the next couple of weeks. Next is training and development, so making sure that industry has access to quality training and development and drive up the overall quality and innovation within the industry. Making sure that we're improving apprenticeship completion rates and a focus on supporting, as I say, training that drives through performance, digitalisation, modern methods of construction and decarbonisation, just to name a few. And then last but not least is the standards and qualifications. So CITB work with industry to agree the minimum required competence and standards that will deliver for the training to deliver on the priorities that we've just mentioned there previously. So you may be wondering, well, why community benefits? So back in 2008, CITB responded to industry demand. Contractors were increasingly being asked to deliver jobs and training as part of public sector contracts. However, there was no guidance around expectations and what sort of proportionate numbers were required. So industry came to CITB as we provide a lot of research and evidence base and forecasting of skills requirements along with labour forecasting tools to enable industry to come to clients with realistic and proportionate outcomes on what could be expected across a number of projects depending upon their type, size and value. CITB decided to take that a step further and invest some funding to develop posts that would manage the development and the delivery of the employment and skills KPIs across construction projects and programmes. As a result of those funded projects, we were able to provide an evidence base on realistically what could be delivered in terms of skills training and recruitment across Tier 1 contractors, but also the supply chains and how best to engage with local suppliers. That enabled us to provide the industry approved benchmarks to demonstrate what could be achieved and what had been achieved. CITB then decided to take that a step further to provide additional support to those with a common interest, governments, clients and industry, and provide the client-based approach guidance, which enabled clients to utilise those benchmarks and know exactly what they were asking for in terms of the construction project and that spend. That just ensured that there was consistency, clarity, and ultimately collaboration and early dialogue. So what sits within the benchmarks? We've got 7 KPIs that sit within the benchmarks, and we've got a set of 17 different benchmarks which look at different project types. So the example you can see here on the screen is around residential. We have highways, infrastructure, repairs and maintenance, regeneration, specific benchmarks around prison builds. And you can see clearly the focus again around the priorities that CITB and industry deem as important. So offering work experience placements, providing clear careers information, advice and guidance, creating jobs for the local community, and upskilling the supply chain, ultimately to bring them on board and put them in a better position to be able to tender for future contracts as well. These benchmarks, and again just reiterating and echoing what everybody else has spoken about, and not just to be lifted and used. There needs to be a real understanding about what is needed in the local area, looking at the supply, the demand, the capacity, the existing projects, supply chains perhaps working over multiple projects, the schools perhaps saturated with a number of careers information, advice and guidance events, or could we reduce them and look at other numbers in other areas? In addition to the benchmarks and the guidance, CITB also has grants and funding to deliver on all of the 7 KPIs. So we have grants up to £14,500 a year for up to £14,500 per apprentice, not per year, up to £600 per achievement for SVQ qualifications, and there's also support for attendance and achievement of HNCs, HNDs and degrees. The Skills and Training Fund, that's direct employer funding targeted towards small and medium businesses to provide them with upfront cash to deliver what their business needs to increase their innovation and their productivity within the sector, or as it stands at the moment, particularly with the pandemic, with COVID, just to at least sustain their business to get through these uncertain times. And last but not least, we have the Structured Fund, which is where CITB will commission a piece of research, identify evidence of need and associated outcomes to be delivered to meet that particular need. The on-site hub model, which I just mentioned earlier, is an example of that. And here are just a few examples of some of the clients that we've been working with over the last 10 years. And you may be wondering why on earth we have a picture of a bull and a large-scale regeneration project on the same slide. That's just to give you a little bit of a flavour in terms of the different types of projects that we've been able to support with the use of the guidance and the engagement with industry. And the first one is a bull stud refurbishment. And who knew Scottish Government owned a bull stud? Well, they do in Inverness. And back in 2011, they decided to invest £2 million to refurbish that facility. Scottish Government were the guinea pigs in terms of utilising the CITB guidance. They engaged at a very early stage with CITB to develop the appropriate employment and skills criteria. And this particular project was able to emphasise the social, economic and environmental outcomes by including the relevant award criteria at the early possible stage, knowing what to ask for and when to ask. They were able to reduce the landfill, deliver the employment and skills commitments and increase the biodiversity and rainwater harvesting across the project. Robertson Construction were leading on that particular project, and in fact were able to deliver over and above what had initially been asked for, and offered some additional work experience and local community engagement with the agricultural community as well. The next one that you see there is the Glasgow North Side Hill project. This is a Glasgow City Region Deal project, £250 million investment, largest regeneration project out with London. Very exciting indeed. I've been working with Glasgow City Region Deal colleagues over a number of years to help with the development of their community benefits strategy. And this was an example of industry coming together with some really innovative solutions to deliver, not only to meet the expected requirements, but over and above. Keepmoat Homes, Morgan Sindall came together with Civil Training, Tigers Training and Glasgow Kelvin College to put together a pathways to support priority groups to move into opportunities within the construction sector. CITB had commissioned funds to widen the talent pool to allow industry to fish from the different ponds that they wouldn't ordinarily fish from. So perhaps people with additional barriers that need to be addressed before they move into employment. This particular project focused on ex-service leavers and those not in employment and education, with intensive guidance and support, on-site experience, having the opportunity to obtain the appropriate qualifications to fill those job opportunities that are available through the tier ones and the supply chain. And as I say, just reflecting on sort of the 10 years that industry have been working in this particular area, CITB facilitate a working group and a forum to look at how do we interpret that policy and actually turn that into practice, and what does good look like. So we have the Construction Inclusive Growth Working Group. That's senior managers who have experience in developing the benchmarks back in 2010, and again delivering on this particular agenda for the last 10 years. So they look at the different policies, whether that's procurement, whether it's skills, whether it's climate, and say, what can we do to practically deliver on this agenda? They then oversee our Community Benefit Forum, which largely has around about 40 tier 1, tier 2 contractors who come together to share best practice about some of the challenges and opportunities with the operational delivery at quite a local level with local organisations. And that forum brings together key organisations as guest speakers to come along and talk about, it might be policy. So for example, Joe's been along. We have Skills Development Scotland to talk about the skills side of things, DWP, DYW, as well as third sector and supported businesses, so they can say exactly what it is that they can offer, but also to understand some of the challenges that industry faces while delivering on these, and perhaps influence some of the future incentives to be able to support that. And I guess I'd just like to leave you with this quote from Gandhi, one of the many wonderful quotes, but the future depends upon what you do today. So it's not just about thinking about the here and now, but actually thinking about what we want long term. So I guess my advice, and again echoing what everybody else has spoken about previously, is engage early, share that good practice, and deliver those sustainable results to enable Scotland to flourish. And I will hand you over to Vanessa. Hopefully we're back on track with timing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to share Perth and Kinross Council's Community Benefits wish list. We thought we would start off just by playing you a short video. So I think Alison's got that to share. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now. Okay, so the wish list approach strengthens our link with our suppliers and our communities, and the purpose of it is to deliver some meaningful community benefits. So in the early days of adding community benefits to tenders, we were receiving very little buy-in from the services or from the supplier community. Many of the benefits offered were very generic. Quite often it was the same ones being repeated, and very little of what we got offered was ever followed up on or delivered. So the problem was that we didn't know what communities needed, and the suppliers didn't know what they needed either, so we were never getting a good match. So to resolve the problem, we decided to ask the communities what they needed, and it was out of this that the wish list was born. So the aim of the wish list is to make it easy for community groups and third sector organisations to tell us what they need. For communities, we have created a simple online form for them to tell us what their needs are. And for suppliers, we have created an online wish list and map, which offers an easy way to connect with communities and organisations who have a defined need. So who did we involve? We created a community benefits board, which was central to the initial scoping of the project. The board had strategic responsibility for overseeing the implementation and the use of community benefits. With them, we held bi-monthly meetings, and that ensured that progress was maintained and they could assess any changes that were required. We also developed a working group, and this was formed from a network of community benefits champions, and they represented our main benefit themes, which were improving employability and skills, economic impact, community investment, and improving education. The champions acted as a sense check, ensuring that any ideas and processes we put down in paper would be workable in practice. And we also consulted with a range of incumbent suppliers to refine the process from the supply side. We presented to our local action partnership chairs and the Community Planning Partnership Executive Officer Group, and we asked them to help promote the initiative throughout the communities that they engage with. To help us get off to a quick start, we commissioned an external company, and they engaged with the third sector organisations and asked them what they wanted. They helped the organisations to write and submit the first wishes on the list, which allowed us to launch it on the website. And they also created a comprehensive contact list, which we can use for any future engagement. We held 2 launch events. One was for suppliers, and we were helped out with that by the Supplier Development Programme. They were happy to host that for us. And we also held an internal launch event for our own staff. At the internal event, we welcomed speakers to describe what community benefits mean to them, to help our procuring officers to begin thinking about the benefits they can bring to their local communities. So the speakers included the Lintel Trust, some of our contract managers, suppliers, and also a secondary school teacher and 2 of her pupils. So that session went down very well. So how did we do it? We created a simple online form to capture requests. And we did this by using Quick Survey. And that just means that it's easy for the community groups to go in and fill in, I think it's 3-4 basic questions. So we didn't want there to be too much burden and form filling for them. So the requests are then mediated and published as a PDF on the webpage, which suppliers can go in and view. And we created an online searchable map. So we did this with the help of our IT team and their GIS area. One of the maps highlights specific requests from community groups within Perth and Kinross who require some help in achieving their goals. And the second map shows community benefits that have already been delivered by suppliers. So the URL to the web page is published on our tender documents. Each wish on the wish list is allocated a benefit type, and each benefit type has points allocated. The number of community benefit points to be delivered is dependent on the value and duration of the contract. Bidders are then asked in the response what community benefits they will deliver. However, they are not scored in this. They are scored on how the bidder proposes to deliver and report on community benefits. So to advertise the wish list, we made good use of social media. So we used Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we did that with the help of our comms team. 4 months after the initial launch, we created a YouTube video, which is what you watched at the start. And that's had about 650 views to date, which is good. And we also used all our internal council news bulletins, Yammer, procurement team newsletters, all to help highlight to staff the benefits of doing this, so that things are actually being delivered. We also tried to make sure where suppliers did deliver wishes that they got some kind of recognition on social media, just to have a bit more, just to think, you know, something a bit extra for them, a bit more promotion rather than just doing it to fulfill a contract. So the unique visitors to our webpage has increased by 176% in 11 months. So that was a great success in itself. So we've had 76 wish list requests submitted from 40 community organisations to date. 21 requests have been fulfilled. So just a few of these are Richard Irvine donated £500 towards Perthshire's trees. They also fulfilled a few other wishes, but that was probably the main one. Oh. Sidey helped Perth Strathty Harriers with the printing of new season membership paperwork. And Bar Printers donated 500 drawing pads to Ailith Community Youth Partnership. So in 2019-20, PKC awarded 80 regulated contracts to 166 suppliers. To keep track of community benefits promised and delivered, we created a community benefits tracker spreadsheet, which contains a graphical dashboard. We don't include the cash value for non-cash benefits received. So if it's, for example, the drawing pads, we don't try and put a cash value to that. It would only be if it was actually a donation that we would include that. The tracker is published on our intranet site, and it's available for staff, contract owners and elected members to view. So the main lessons learned was, first of all, keep it simple. Some of our initial ideas were too resource intensive. So we're a small team, work on a really small budget, and we quickly learned that we needed to keep it simple. So keeping it simple has also meant that we can manage the process within our existing resource, and it's easier for community organisations and suppliers to navigate. Getting a list of local community groups and organisations and contacting them was clearly vital, but it was one of the more tricky parts, which was why we engaged with the external consultant. Other organisations who may choose to do something similar could use a graduate or an admin to do this, but we didn't have the resource in the team at the time. So ensuring organisations have a backup plan. So when we were engaging with community groups, we found it important to make them aware that their wish may not get delivered, certainly not by the time that they might need it. So if it was time sensitive, they just needed to be reminded to have a plan B. And involving the contract owners, so to achieve better buy-in to the whole process, we involved contract owners from the beginning, try and get them to engage with their suppliers and ensure that the wishes are delivered from their contracts. And again, difficult to put a monetary value on community benefits. So the wish list that we have produced is about the social value. So communities are grateful to receive anything that they need, no matter how big or small, and they value the low value items just as much as the bigger stuff. So if you would like to find out more after today's event about our community benefits approach, you can go to our website, www.pkc.gov.uk, and just search for community benefits, and it's the first link. Or you can email our generic account, which is communitybenefits@pkc.gov.uk. So thank you for listening. Hopefully I was in time.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. It's tricky when we're doing this on Zoom because we don't want to cut off really good content, and we want to give everybody a chance to say what they've got to do. But we are running a bit over time, so we're going to now move into the working groups. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Alison Jones, who can explain how this is being organised. But just before I do that, I don't know if you're spotting this, but there are a number of questions coming up in the chat box. We have been asking our speakers just to have a look at these and to consider any responses they might want to make during the discussions in the roundtable working groups. The next part is really over to you now to join in the conversation about what good procurement looks like. So reflecting on this morning's inputs, but also your own experiences. So on that basis, I'm just looking at the timings here. I think, can we allow, if possible, just 10 minutes for the groups so that we can come back into the room around about 25 past or thereabouts, so I can get us finished roughly on time. And can I also ask that those that are facilitating the groups, if you could possibly just have really 3 succinct points you want to feed back from each group, that would be really, really helpful, and we could try and keep it tight. Okay, we may have to run on just slightly by about 5 minutes, but I definitely don't want to hold people back because I know that everyone's got a busy. Do you think we have everybody back now? Hopefully we do. Okay, sorry, I'm sure for everyone that may have been a bit frustrating because you probably were just starting to get into your conversations and we've had to come back. However, what I will say is, of course, this conversation doesn't stop here. This is just the first conversation, if you like. There's a second procurement event next week, next Thursday, and I'm hoping that most of you here, or if not all of you, will have actually signed up for it. And I would ask that actually, if you go away, if you have any thoughts, any comments, anything you want us to feed back, please let us know. But do come back and we'll continue the discussion next week. We have some really interesting speakers along for next week's session, which is focusing on progressive procurement. So we're going to have inputs from Barbara Morton, who is an expert in sustainable procurement, and we've also got Jane Thompson from the Glasgow City Region deal, and also Laurie Wilcox from the Scottish Government, who's an expert in data and evidencing what's needed around procurement. So I would encourage you to really come along to that. Can I just finish today really by thanking all of our expert speakers, really fantastic contributions. I appreciate there wasn't as much time for discussion, but I think it was worth having the time to listen to what everyone had to say. So thank you, Joe, Lorna, Edwina, Laura and Vanessa, who've taken time out of your busy schedules to be here and present this morning. Also thanks to the EDAS team, Alison, Elaine and Elizabeth, who have been supporting in the background and who organised and got this event going. And last but not least of all, to all of you for attending and participating. We'd love to hear what you thought. We'd love to hear about ways you'd like us to perhaps extend the discussion or other themes or ideas you would like us to cover in the future. I believe there's another slide Alison just quickly wants to put up, and it's to do with future events. I can't finish off without giving a little bit of a plug for some more EDAS events that are coming up. We've got a couple of courses that are going to be running over the next few weeks. We've got one on Introduction to Local Economic Development and one on Appraisal and Evaluation. So if you're interested in either of those, they really are excellent. I would highly recommend you consider them. And we've also got another COVID Conversations. If any of you have been at those events that we've been running, it's the 7th one that we're running. This one one is focusing, as you can see, on the labour market and implications for skills and employment. And again, great range of speakers coming in for that event. So please do sign up if you can. So many thanks. Really hope to see you again soon. It's been a pleasure hosting this event this morning, and I really hope you found it interesting and helpful, and do feedback. We'd love to hear your views. Thank you.